Hey guys, a few weeks ago I tried to do a video that was like how to make a pinafore in the amount of time that it would take you to watch a movie. I almost got there, to be fair. The movie was Jurassic Park 2, Peak Cinema, and I had this fabric that I got at the thrift store. It's a curtain. I showed it off in my last Furby video. This curtain, I wanted to make it into a pinafore because I think they're really cute. Maybe I'll put some pictures I stole off Pinterest or something to show you kind of what I'm talking about. I got a good, strong start to getting it done before the movie was over. And then, eventually I didn't do that and instead finished it like a couple days later. So that's what the video is today.
And yes, in case you're wondering, I had a mental break earlier this week and shaved off half my eyebrows.
It's gonna be fun. Cut to voiceover.
So your first step is to take a really long time trying to lay your fabric flat on the floor. You want to lie down and line the bottom of the fabric up to where you want it to fall. So I wanted it to fall just below my knees. And then mark where your waist is with something. I use some soap. And make sure your cat is right there, always a little bit too close. And then turn that mark you made into a straight line. Probably most people would use a ruler for that, but I just folded it in half. So then you want to get your fabric back into frame in the most awkward way possible. And once you've done that, make sure that your massive head is in the way so no one can see what you're doing. But actually you're just cutting down that line you made. So that's going to be the skirt. Now with the other half of your fabric, hold it up to your chest and make sure that it's not see-through. This one was pretty see-through, so I decided to double it up. Even though I'm not going to be wearing it by itself, it's really more like an apron than an actual dress. And then make sure you're definitely not in screen while you use the soap to mark both the center of the bodice and what shape you want the bodice to be. Once you have your shape drawn, I want mine to look a little something like this. You want to fold your bodice in half along the little center line and then cut along the shape lines that you drew to get a symmetrical bodice when you unfold it. Little story here, I have been struggling with the audio for hours and I think I maybe just figured it out and maybe it just wasn't literally recording from the right microphone. Anyway, your bodice should look like this. So now I'm wearing the rest of the fabric like a cape just to double check that there is enough fabric for me to make straps. Straps is not the next step, however. The next step is the waistband, which I'm going to be making out of another curtain that I bought from the secondhand store. And this is where the best part of using things like curtains and sheets comes into play, which is that they already have hemmed edges. We've used the hemmed edge of the main piece of fabric so that we don't have to hem the bottom of our pinafore. But now we're going to use the very wide hem of this fabric as the waistband. So I measure it around my waist to get approximate length. And then where I'm cutting, I'm cutting so that the hem, I'm cutting just the hem off so that I don't have to sew. It's hard to explain. Look at the screen. I show. So now after cutting, I measured it around my waist again and realized that I have just enough to fit around my waist, which means I'm not going to have enough to button up the skirt in the back. But you know what? That's fine, because buttons are a bitch to sew on. We're just going to do it with ties. Then I fold over the one raw edge of the waistband and sew that down so that it won't fray. I don't know why I'm wearing my skirt over my head here, but it's time to break up the sewing machine finally. So the first thing we're going to do is turn our stitch length all the way up and sew along the very top of the skirt so that we can bunch it up later and freak my cat out because he's never seen me sew before. Sew all along the top with a very wide stitch length and make sure that there are long ends to both sides of the thread so that you can bunch it up. The easiest way to do that is to find the middle point of both your skirt fabric and your waistband and pin that together and then do each side of the skirt. I know it's not called like bunching. It's called, I think this is ruffling, but I'm stupid, so brain empty right now. But you're going to, one side at a time, ruffle it up so that it fits perfectly into your waistband. Mine isn't super roughly because the skirt wasn't much longer than the waistband, but if you have a wider piece of fabric to begin with, you'll get a more ruffly skirt. So once you have all of the ruffles laid out great, pin it in place, and make sure you're pinning it right sides together. I tried to do something like fancy or whatever while I was making this the first time. Oh, we've moved on. Before we sew the skirt onto the waistband, we're going to make straps, or not straps, ties. And I'm doing this by cutting off the hemmed part of the fabric like I did for the waistband. And then to make a second tie, I measured double the width of that piece of hem so that I could fold this piece of fabric up and have it be the same width. Oh, it's struggling. Recording voiceover is hard, you guys. But while we were here, I also cut out the fabric for the shoulder straps. But more on that later. But they're basically constructed exactly the same way as the back ties were. So the construction of the ties is pretty simple. I fold them in half and then sew down the long end and across one of the short ends to make like sort of a really long skinny pocket, and then using whatever, I've just used my finger or like a chopstick, turn them inside out so that you have like a nice long skinny tube with all of the raw edges on the inside. So then I put the raw edge end of the back ties in between the waistband fabric and the skirt fabric, and then sewed all three parts together when I sewed the skirt to the waistband. And when I did that, I made sure to sew below the threads that I used to ruffle up the skirt. So now I'm making the straps for the back, and like I said before, it's the same method of construction as the back ties, but I actually made 4 separate little tubes, 2 longer ones to go over the shoulders and 2 shorter ones to go up from the bodice so that they can tie in the front, which you'll see it when I do the reveal. So the next step was to sew the 2 halves of the bodice together, and when I did that, I stuck the raw end of the front half of the shoulder strap through the 2 layers of fabric so that it would get caught while I was sewing the bodice together. So once I sewed the bodice together, I flipped it right side out and then sewed it onto the waistband. And this is where I made my biggest mistake making this, which was that I didn't try it on before I sewed the bodice to the waistband. So the bodice ended up being ridiculously long on me, and then I had to fix it afterwards. Just don't forget to do your try-ons while you're making your project, kids. It would have made this so much easier. That aside, I sewed the bodice to the waistband by finding the middle of each and lining those up first to make sure that the bodice was in the middle of the waistband. And when I was sewing the bodice on, I also made sure to sew on the longer shoulder straps to the back of the waistband, right above where I sewed on the back ties. So that was the bulk of the construction done, and the only thing left to do was a few finishing touches, the first of which was to clean up some of the seams so that the raw edges were hidden away. I decided to do this by hand because at that point my sewing machine had really gotten on my nerves. It's a old sewing machine and it operates like it's an old sewing machine. I decided to do this by hand by felling, which is when you tuck one side of the seam allowance underneath the other side and fold the other side over so that all the raw edges are inside, and then you use tiny little stitches to sew the seam allowance in place. That's obviously not the best description of it, but I will link a video in the description for where I learned how to do this. Final step was to make pockets, which I made little patch pockets out of the same material that I made the waistband out of, and that's really the easiest way to make pockets in my experience. So to make the pattern, I just laid a piece of paper over the skirt and then sketched out a shape, and I made sure that my phone could fit in it because that's the most important thing that I'm going to be carrying around. After I did that, cut that shape out of the paper and then used that to cut out 2 pieces of fabric using the already made hem of the curtain as the top of the pocket. After I did that, I ironed down all of the edges so that the raw edges were hidden away and then just top stitched it onto the skirt. And that's it.
Ow! I hurt my ankle! Ugh! Okay. I have no idea if I'm in focus. So, that's it. That's the story of how I made this pinafore. And it's clearly not perfect. I think I need to do a little bit more fitting for the bodice, and the pockets are just on two different planes of existence. But it was really fun, and it was actually like really easy, and I didn't use a pattern, and I didn't know what I was doing when I started. I just kind of jumped into it, and I think it turned out pretty good for going into it with like literally half a ass of a plan. So yeah, thanks for coming to the show today, the YouTube show. Next week there's going to be another Furby update. So I promise, next week we're going to talk about Furbies, and I'm going to show you how my Furby progress is coming, and maybe we'll sew a Furby skin together. Other than that, I have a podcast. I put out a podcast last Saturday. I put out the first episode. It's still not on every podcasting app yet, because apparently that takes a long time. But we're getting there. So if you're interested, the link to the Twitter is down in the description. It's called the Myths You Missed podcast, and I'm telling fun stories, like myths and legends from that you probably don't really hear. So like nothing Greek, nothing Roman. We're starting off with an Irish epic. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited. And the next episode of that comes out on Saturday. Which reminds me that I have to go record that. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you liked it, you can subscribe if you want, or like or something. I don't know. That's what YouTubers say, right? Yeah, that's everything. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye!